Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well. I wanted to say thank you for all the positive feedback on my recent videos. I really do appreciate it. And I've got another confirmation today. I've been pretty busy this week, but things have just calmed down again. But I've really enjoyed doing all of my narrations recently. I seem to be getting sent really good stories and I really appreciate everyone who sends me them. I hope you're all doing great and have a brilliant day. Make sure you check out my Instagram at JoeTheInsomniac2 and the podcast in the description below. My ex-boyfriend and I did a rainforest walk, which dips deep down to the bottom of the forest. There's no other cars in the car park, and we didn't come across any hikers. We have it all to ourselves and had a great time for the most part. As we're walking up, my ex was ahead of me and suddenly stopped, raising his hand to signal for me to stop. I look up and there's this woman staring at us ahead. She looks normal, but I get a chill as soon as I see her. Something about her's off. She had dark brown hair, which I only noticed because it contrasts so highly against her cardigan. Now her cardigan was all I could focus on. It went right down to her feet and was bleach white, as though it had just been pulled off a rack, but we're in a forest. How is it so white? And why on earth would you wear it hiking? We stare at her for what must have been 30 or 40 seconds, but feels like an eternity. There was no way I was going to take another step towards her. Instead, I felt this kind of stillness, as if the forest around us froze in time and went silent. She finally turned around and started to walk slowly back up the trail. We watched her and waited, not saying a word to each other, until she's out of sight before we start going again. The car park was still around half an hour away, and we just fast walked in silence, a bit on edge, just trying to listen for anything. We look back and don't see her. It's absolutely the strangest thing that ever happened to me. The one thing I can't explain was how her cardigan was perfectly white. Even the bottom of it had no signs that she had been in the forest whatsoever. It gives me chills thinking of it. This happened 1 year ago, over the course of 5 months, but I've decided now that I want to see other people's opinions on it. I live in a rural area with a few houses around but plenty of forest, and out of nowhere, around 10 to 12 at night, there would be a series of knocks on one side of the house, which isn't odd if it's one time, but this happened many times over the course of 5 months. If I had to put a number on how many times it happened, it's probably around 30. It's the exact same kind of knocking. At first, we thought maybe it's just some kids banging on the other side of the house, but no kid has enough dedication to continue it for this long with no reward. Also, I've stepped outside to see if anything's there, and literally, it's as if no one's there. I don't really believe in the paranormal, but I genuinely have no clue as to what this could be. When I was younger, I used to have this recurring dream that a girl in a white dress would come to me. At first she was harmless. She would never say anything to me. She would just stand at the foot of my bed and stare at me with these weird black eyes. Now it was almost like a lucid dream, because I would wake up in the exact setting that I fell asleep in every single time. Whether I was staying at my grandma's house or if I was staying in my own bed, it would always happen. Now my father was a park ranger and a very strong man, so I always felt safe having my dad around. But there was one time that he wasn't around, and what happened I could never explain. Now, the exact same thing happened. I was so used to it. I wake up in the night, and there's a girl in that pure white dress just staring at me. This time, she raises her hand at me and wants me to come with her. I'm not going to hold her hand. I've rubbed my eyes and it feels like I'm not even in a dream, but I know that I am. She suddenly takes off and sprints outside, into the yard, then into the forest. Even in my dream mind, I still think, hell no, I ain't going out there. And I just go back to sleep. When I wake up, I can't shake the feeling that something was off about that dream. I kind of forget about it. A few years later, I hear off my dad that he's also had the same dreams, and some of the other park rangers have too that he works with, and he's never been able to explain it. He just thought it was nothing more than a dream. Well, that was until one day, I was out with my dad. We were just gonna go into the forest for a small hike together. I was really looking forward to it and always enjoyed doing so. As we get there, just on the tree line where the forest starts, my dad stops dead in his tracks. I've never seen my dad look so scared in his life, and this is literally someone that I've never seen be scared of anything. He says to me, "Don't move," and he goes and picks up a stick. I can finally see what he's looking at, and my god, it's terrifying. It was the exact same dress that the girl in my dream would wear. Literally as though it's just been placed there, no dirt on it whatsoever. My dad goes up to it and pokes it with a stick. We don't need to say anything to each other. It was the exact same thing that both of us had dreamt of. We both sprinted back to the house and agreed not to tell my mum about it, not to scare her. I found out later that my dad actually went there to go and investigate further to see if someone was playing a prank on us. But literally, later in that day, the dress vanished without a trace. It's the single most crazy and unexplainable thing that's ever happened in my life. If it was only me having the dreams and this experience, I wouldn't have been as scared, but the fact that my dad had it too? Crazy. Now my native language is French, so sorry if there's any problems telling this story. This happened last week. I was searching for a cave with my girlfriend, and in France, we have incredibly detailed maps telling us every cave that has been explored. We decided to go to a cave which has a famous area, and there's caves littering the landscape there. So there's a very wooded area. The hills and valleys are very narrow. We spot a good place to start looking at the bottom of a small creek and make our way up. We go to the dirt and then further into the gravel and then the boulder field. That's when I remembered this sub, because we stopped walking at the same time. It was silent. Dead silent. Not even a bird. It's the kind of silence that actually oppresses you. We eventually continued walking uphill and come across a cave. Soon after, a bird breaks the silence, and we realise we are almost dead for asphyxiation. We didn't dare to breathe in silence. Now I've heard of other people having this before, but to experience it yourself is absolutely crazy. I mean, think, it wasn't something we heard that scared us, it was the silence. And it's not just that, you almost feel as though you're being stalked or someone's watching you. Maybe it's a primitive thing that lets us know there's a predator or person in the area, and the animals did the same. But there were no insect sounds either. That's what scares me the most. Usually I just think it was my mind playing tricks on me, but the fact that both of us stopped at the exact same time? Crazy. The details I have on this story are very vague, but someone told me about a teenager who went into the Apocaly National Forest to hike, and then was reported missing several days later when he didn't return home. A couple of months later, when he was found in the woods, he was a different person, appearing like he was drunk. He was tested but had no signs of drugs or alcohol. The negative results. Mentally, He wasn't all there, but physically, there's no signs of him being exposed to anything to cause this. He kept telling people that he encountered something strange. It was several months before he was himself again, and he had very little memory of what happened on those days. I've asked people that I know who live in Oakla or have camped and hiked in the Oakla National Forest, and they've never heard this story. I really didn't know this person who told me this story, but it's crazy. I do know that over the years, people have gone into the Oakla National Forest and never came out. Some of them are harmed or killed by animals, others murdered by the worst enemy of all, humans, and never found again with a trace. Now, I've driven through the forest on State Highway 40, and it's creepy as hell. It's creepy enough in daytime. I guess I'll dive right into what happened, and not bore you with the unimportant details. I was hiking on a trail I'm very familiar with, and because of the changes in the weather, I decided to leave the trail and cut through the woods. I wanted to try and get to my car before a downpour, and I knew this area like the back of my hand. Before I knew it, I felt very disorientated and nothing appears familiar. I'm not too sure if the woods seemed silent before or after I felt this way, but I become undeniably aware of how silent everything is. Oppressingly downright suffocating silence, and my heart began to pound as I stood in place, and it felt as though the woods were spinning and closing around me. It was like I'd stepped into something that I could not comprehend. It was then I noticed something about 15 feet in front of me. It was 10 feet high and about 8 foot wide and distorted. It was like something was bending the light and moving towards me, like a fogged up mirror almost, but with no definitive shape. But it was moving with purpose and intelligence, and would be completely unnoticeable if not for the distortion within and me directly looking at it. I turned to run, and realised another's behind me, the same size and shape. Almost then I realised that there's at least 4 of these things closing in around me, and I'm trapped. What I was seeing my brain cannot make sense of, and I'm in utter panic, shocked and back up against a tree, terrified to run in the direction of those things. I curl up into the fetal position, pull my hands over my ears. They had begun ringing, and the sound was deafening. I closed my eyes as these intelligent-looking cloaked things were all around me, about 5 feet in height. I saw a white flash, like what happens if you ever hit the ground really hard. That's the best way I can describe it. My ears were ringing. The flash, then nothing. I woke up to rain falling on me. Hours had passed. Everything looks normal, and I knew where I was. I gathered myself, checked for injuries, and realised that, weirdly, I'm completely fine, and drove home. I can't make sense of what happened. I've googled similar events but found nothing quite like what happened to me. I have no history of mental illness or other things that could have caused this. I've stumbled across stealth cloaking technologies used by the military, and the technology is primitive compared to what I witnessed. I just don't have the answers, and I don't know what happened to me or why. I've never had anything like it since. I just hate this. I'm definitely going to be seeing a doctor tomorrow. I have no history of seizures or other health issues. I'm in my 20s and fit and sound of mind, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. And now this happened in Ireland, and I was in the Midlands, so I'd rather not be too specific. So my story isn't recent, but I needed to share this. I'm 19 now, but this took place when I was 12. It's something that's always stuck in my mind. The night this encounter happened, everything was pretty normal. I was going back to school the next morning after summer break, so I had to be in bed earlier than I wanted to be. I remember falling asleep to the movie Meet the Robinsons, playing at probably 10:30 p.m. And then I woke up, and I knew it had to be late. But the first thing that I registered was that the TV is completely scrambled. I mean, almost like a DVD that doesn't play so it skips. But it was frozen, so the image was warped and boxy. Except the Meet the Robinsons DVD was fine. At this point, I guess it's around 2 or 3 a.m. The second thing I registered was that there's voices coming from the kitchen. I got out of bed to see what was going on because the voices are talking really loud and sound panicky. When I got to the kitchen, I realised that it was my mum and older sister arguing. The first thing I actually picked up on and comprehended was my mum saying, "Those are definitely aliens, what else could they be?" Almost sounding hysterical. Neither of them saw me enter the kitchen, but I asked what's going on, and my mum looked at me, and I knew she's scared and shaken. She literally had tears in her eyes. She told me in an almost sad voice that aliens were outside. At this point, we're all standing in the kitchen in front of our sliding glass door that looks across the yard. There's a field there. I was confused, so she pulled back the curtain to the kitchen door, and I don't see anything initially. I don't look hard enough. But I then saw my huge dog, German Shepherd and Great Dane mix, sitting in the middle of the yard in the direction of the neighbours, which was to my house on the right side. I asked my mum why he isn't sitting on the porch like normal and why he's so still. To that she said, "You can slide the door very slowly, but don't make too much noise." And usually when the door to the house is open, my dog looks towards it and runs in, but he doesn't. He's still gazing. I didn't realise what was going on, but I was scared because my mum was clearly scared, as my older sister is too. My mum signalled to my sister and I to be quiet, and we were. On a normal night, you can hear animals in the woods, or the trees in the wind, and crickets chirping because it was summer, but that night, we can't hear anything. It's completely silent outside, not even a breeze. This gives me chills that makes me shake. Something's terribly off. My mum shut the door, and my sister and I followed her to the bedroom where my dad was asleep and the windows open. She explains what's going on. She told me that my sister is in my room looking for something and peeks out my window. My room is in the back of the house and my window looks out to the trees behind the house. She saw what she thought was a pack of coyotes, but there's 30 of them, and the closer she looks, she starts to see distinguishable features, and that's when she dipped out of the room and told my mum. But before she could get there, my mum said that she walked outside before my sister came to say what she saw, and saw a tall, dark, slender figure walking down the neighbour's driveway towards our house. She thought it was the neighbour coming over for some reason, but then she suddenly got scared and felt it's best to pretend she's asleep so she wouldn't have to talk to the neighbour. And those events lead us to go into the kitchen window that overlooks the neighbours' houses right next to each other. It's dark. I'm looking very hard and I can see shadowy figures. Most of them are small and very quick, so fast that if you weren't paying attention you wouldn't have noticed, and if you paid even more, you could see the slower, taller ones. They move slow and the silhouettes are dark, darker than their background, almost fluid looking. It doesn't look real at all. And this sucks, but we didn't even think about grabbing a camera and trying to get pictures, which is something I regret. Another thing I noticed that's worth mentioning was that behind the neighbour's house they had woods too. Well within the trees and very low to the ground, there were 3 evenly spaced out lights. One was green, one was red, and another's bluish. The lights were pretty dim. They were never there before though. We watched out the window for about 10 minutes freaking out. My mum almost wheezing because she's so scared. After that, she took us into her room and opened the window more, which I didn't like. It made me more scared. She says be quiet, and since we couldn't hear anything at all coming from outside, we sit in silence until we heard what sounded like a car passing. And we hear the engine sound, but we can just about make out the road from my mum's window, and we see no cars, no headlights, nothing. The engine buzz was loud and turned into something like a plane passing over the house. This lasts for about a minute. Then it's completely silent again. After a few minutes the sound would repeat. Eventually, after all this happened, my mum shut the window and the curtains and we sat there shaking. Another thing to point out was that I did eventually work up the courage to go back to my room, but that was a few hours later and it was getting light out. The TV scrambled so I checked the disc, and it's not working, so I ended up unplugging the DVD player to get it off the screen. That's about all that happened that night, but it freaked me out so bad that it makes me cry thinking of it. Not to mention that I wasn't the only one that saw it. I hate that I even witnessed this at such a young age. It was truly horrifying. A lot of you wanted to know my cousin's story on the Skinwalker, but I'm going to try and get to the actual story from him tomorrow and fill you in there. I do have another one though that I'd like to share, however. This one doesn't have anything to do with skinwalkers, at least I don't think so. There was an old legend about a lost town in the forest near where I lived, and for the most part, it was only a legend. However, it was noted as being true, and a ghost town is near my town. The story that I'm about to tell is one that happened when I was 11, and still scares me to this day. My dad likes to take me on the little off-road rides in his Jeep. It wasn't necessarily an off-road one either. It was a Cherokee, so it wasn't really built for the backwoods dirt trails. He decides to do this and go throughout a park with me and told me that it's going to be fun and we could go and check out the ruins of an old building. We decided along the way that we're going to have a real good exploration here. There was one of those official vehicles only gates on this dirt road we come up to, and usually that would stop people, but my dad just decides to break the lock and push it open anyways. My father was ever the best to listening to rules, but sometimes he had to break them. About 30 minutes into our drive on this road, he's shining a flashlight out of the window, trying to find this building, and he has his headlights on full. We're both looking for signs of, well, anything. Eventually we come upon this really steep hill. He says, "Oh, I think I remember this," and just guns it up there. Naturally, we get stuck at a certain angle. We can't reverse or accelerate. My dad never likes to admit when he's wrong, and said he can fix it, and started thinking that he's going to be able to fix this really easily. I was very curious, and I still am, and I got the flashlight and started looking into the woods around us. I'm kind of worried about bears or wolves, to be honest. I then noticed a little light in the valley below us, and turned off the flashlight to see it. At the same time, my dad's cursing at our car, and I decided to get a little closer to the light and see if I can figure out what it was. May need to see if there was somebody who could help us. As I got closer to it, the trees took it apart a little bit, and I can see there's a very small town. The best way I can describe it is like a town from the movie Big Fish. Just very numbered set of buildings. As I got closer, I heard voices and I saw people, but something just seemed really weird, like they weren't really there. I decided to try and get closer to the town, but the closer I get, the more weirded out I feel. I eventually felt if I didn't turn around, I would never come back, which is very odd, and I've never had this feeling before. I decided to turn around and go back to my dad. He didn't get the car unstuck by himself, at least, and we just slept in the car. The following morning, the park ranger showed up, and after a lengthy talk with my dad and a very hefty ticket, he helps us get the car unstuck and be on our way. Before we left, I tried and catch another glimpse of the village, and it was the ruins that my dad was talking about. I talked to the park ranger about it, and he said, well, this was once a thriving village, just lost in time. I decided not to say anything about what I saw to the park ranger, but did tell my dad, but his usual skepticism turned me away. I have visited since, and it's a pretty decent place, and I told my friends about what I saw, and they believed me for the most part, and we decided to stay out one night to try and find it and see if anything happened, but of course nothing did. But I still remember that night as if it was yesterday, and I still get goosebumps thinking of it. I went hiking with one of my old friends. He used to be homeless and in a bad situation with his parents, so I let him stay with me until he got back on his feet. One evening, before he officially started staying, we went one day into the woods to get his stuff from an area that he was posted up at during the night. It's probably 11 PM when we meet up. I got off work late. We go to the woods to pick up his stuff, and we kind of get lost in the dark. It was abnormally dark considering the full moon was fixing to come around from its phase. Neither of us have flashlights and my phone had died, so I can't use it. Bad planning, I'll admit that. We stumble across a bunch of decently large moulds of dirt in the offshoots of the woods. Each mound had a small tree growing from the middle and a crude blank sign at the tops. By this point it's eerily quiet, considering we're very close to the deepest part of the woods where there should be lots of sounds. We eventually found his campsite and hurried out. Outside of the woods now, we're walking down a one-way street leading to the main road. A large moving truck comes our way and slows and passes by us. We pay no mind to it and just nod and keep going. The truck turns around and pulls into a little offshoot, stopping parallel to us with the engine on. The driver gets out and watches us. We weren't being conspicuous or anything by looking back, just glancing over the shoulder here and there. Nothing you can make out in the darkness from the distance has anyhow. We're almost at the top of the street, and we're near my car when he goes back in his truck and I guess opens the back door. The next thing we hear is 3 large dogs barking their heads off and a flashlight pointing our way. We started running and had to do some evading through neighbourhood streets before we could get back. Nothing ever come of it. No cops, no local town chatter, nothing. I still have no idea what we ran across, but I knew we shouldn't have been there. I have a horrible feeling that this could have ended a lot worse for us. So this happened about 15 years ago to my brother and me, and I still can't come up with a satisfactory logical answer to our experience. For detail, this happened in Ontario, Canada, and we were 8, and 5 at the time. It's in a suburban area, built around a medium-sized forest, and our house backs onto the woods. We were driving home with our mum, and we were arguing. She told us to get out and walk the rest of the way. She dropped us off in front of the woods at the playground. There's a connected public path leading back up through the woods to our street. It's about a 5-minute walk away, and a small hill between the playground and the main road. We weren't pleased that we got in trouble, so we made up quickly and start playing on the sliding swings. My brother goes up and says, "Hey, who are those guys?" I look over and saw 2 men dressed in black suits, white shirts and black sunglasses coming over the top of the hill towards us. They're walking briskly and purposely in our direction. They had brown hair, not close cropped but short and fairly pale skin. It's beyond bizarre. It scared me immediately. I told my brother to come down the slide and we have to go home. They had already unnerved him enough that he actually listened to me. We started down the path, and when I look over my shoulder, they're still coming towards us quickly. That was horrifying, so I start to walk even faster, holding my brother's hand. Maybe 30 seconds later, I looked behind me again, and they've started running. They're gaining on us. That pushes us over the edge, and I scream at my brother to run home as fast as he can. I know he's quicker than me. I think he's going to be able to tell my parents if we're going to be kidnapped. I have honestly never ran so fast in my life, and we didn't look behind us again until we made it home. Our parents were still unloading the groceries and were surprised. They figured out that we had spoken to someone, and they couldn't really understand exactly what happened as the men never said a word. They're accompanied by a wall of silence. Neither of us have ever experienced anything like it again, and it wasn't until a year later that I watched the BuzzFeed Unsolved episode about Men in Black that I realised what I had encountered. My dad and I went on a hiking trip a few days ago. My dad is a waterfall fanatic. He wants to see as many as possible. So he and I are hiking along a very pretty trail. We're hiking along a river. It's flowing nicely. There's mountains all around us. The trail is weaving around big, beautiful boulders. I'm hiking at most 30 feet ahead of him, looking for a spot to sit down and have picnic lunch on. And as I round a blind curve in the trail, I just freeze. Sitting on a stump maybe 10 feet off to the right is a guy, but he's wearing one of those colourful badger hoodies. With the hoodie pulled up, he's wearing a Halloween style bunny mask. He sees me and stands up right after my dad rounds a corner. We are all three sizing each other up in silence, and my dad addresses him. "What's up, buddy?" The masked man then tips his head as though he's deciding what to do with us. He then finally speaks, saying, "Oh, not much. You aren't the guys I'm waiting for. You have a good day." And then he turns and jogs off quickly. Strapped on his lower back is a large hunting knife and a pistol. We lose sight of him pretty quick. We hadn't seen a soul on the trail all day, and we'd been there for almost 4 hours. Needless to say, we leave the waterfall for another day and turn quick. Once we're off the trail, we report it to the local forest service and police, but they say they can't do much aside from keep an eye out for any suspicious activity. Now, the guy had no backpack or water or anything, which makes me think that he either had it stashed somewhere or was camping nearby. I hate to admit it, but I desperately wanted to ask the guy who he was looking for and why. Let me start by saying that I love camping. Anytime my friends and I come home from college, we loaded up our cooler with beer, grab some gear and go screw around outside. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or friends ever wanted to go with me, so I often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day, the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed my gear, hopped in my car I borrowed from a buddy and drove to a spot that's secluded yet within safety of civilization if I need to get help. Camping also creeps me out though, but that feeling is always outweighed by the joy of it. So I make a little camp and a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much, but I'm enjoying myself reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got the feeling that I'm being watched and stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over to my right, but see a doe bolt from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to camping. I just kept freaking myself out though, hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light cast by the fire. I always get inside my head, so I shrugged it off and kept whistling and just enjoying myself. Around 1, I decided to get into my tent and snuff out the lantern. I've been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars until I passed out. It's around 2 AM. I hear footsteps. They sound pretty light and sort of timid. I think to myself that it's a deer or some animal, maybe a raccoon, but I'm on guard. About 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open later, and I hear a rubbing sound, and the tent fabric being pushed in a bit. I don't know what to do. I'm paralyzed with fear. I desperately wanted to go and get the knife and stab this person, but I think maybe it's one of my buddies messing with me. Suddenly, it stopped. I was starting to feel more secure because daylight's coming in about 2 or 3 hours, but I'm sure as hell not gonna sleep. All of a sudden, it's about 4 o'clock. I realise I should have my boots on in case anything were to happen. After having stayed up and keeping alert for a little longer, my friend's car alarm goes screaming. I sprint out of the tent. I got about 2 steps out before something grabs me around the mouth. I open my mouth to scream, but instead, the person stops me. I've heard that people can perform insane feats of strength with adrenaline rush. In my case, I just clamped down. His finger popped off almost. He screamed and pulled his hand away. He took off, running down the hill and into the opposite direction. I take off. I must have looked ridiculous, but I didn't care. I quickly make it into the car and speed it out of there, calling up my friends, telling them what's happened and the police, and get some real clothing. When the cops get there, they checked it out. The cops went out with a light. They brought me back some of my things that I left there. But what made me most scared is that right next to the tent was a gas can, and lighter fluid had been poured around my tent. The kicker is, they never caught the guy, so somewhere out there is some crazy guy that's looking to make fires in tents with people in them. Growing up, every summer in July and August, my family would get together and camp out for 2 weeks at the White Lake State Park in Tamworth, NH. Some of my best childhood memories were made there, with rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, etc. Now when I was around my late teens, My family stopped gathering together to camp out after my grandpa passed away. One of the last years I was there, this one particular memory always stuck with me. A little over 10 years ago, I was 16 years old. It was around 10 PM at night when I noticed I had a missed call on my cheap little track phone. My family was sitting around the campfire cooking s'mores and sharing some laughs, so I decided to go and get some privacy to return the call. I then took a long narrow trail that winds in between other campsites that, at the end, leads up to the bathroom. I wasn't going up to the bathroom, I just wanted to find an empty campsite and sit at a picnic table to make my call. There was plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground was where I'm going and it's vacant. There was no other campers nearby in that area. It was quiet and dark, so I chose a campsite. I sit down at a table. There's lights from a distance that light up from behind the top of the hill behind me, illuminating my surroundings just a bit. I called my friend and was carrying on a conversation for around 20 minutes. As I'm sitting there, staring straight ahead, I see the silhouette coming down from the road in front of me. The figure is coming towards my direction, where all the empty campsites are. I can see it's a person. It's not that unusual to see people strolling through the campsite for a night walk. The people I see usually have flashlights, so this person doesn't, but I'm not creeped out, just curious. As the person gets closer, I can see the outline better now, and that it's a man. I also noticed his pace slows down. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continued conversing on my cell phone. A minute or two passes by now, and now he stopped moving. He's just standing there in the road looking straight into the campsite where I'm at. Now I don't know if he can see me. Oh wait, he can now. He's staring at me. I step back. He was a little heavy and tall. I can make out he's wearing a jacket. I can't see many facial features, but I would guess that I was staring at a man in his late 40s or 50s. Alarm bells are going off in my head now. My mind has turned to mush at this point and I'm frozen. I was no longer listening to what my friend is saying. I just stare off at this guy. He starts moving now. He was tiptoeing towards me, very carefully, like he didn't want to make a sound. He put one foot in front of the other, leaned forward in a slight hunch form. It looked as though he was charging towards me. In that moment, I snapped out of my mind-mushy frozen state and leaped forward off the picnic table and began running through the campsite back towards the trail. Thud, thud, thud. I can hear him getting closer now, leaves scuffling, heavy yet fast footsteps. Footsteps were getting louder and closer. I made it back to that narrow trail. Once he gets close to whereabout I was, I heard the sound of twigs snapping and the sound of someone annoyed that they've tripped or hurt themselves. Most likely he wasn't familiar with the trail like I was. Whatever the reason it was, it causes him to just stop. I don't stop looking back. I just keep running and running until finally I make it back to my family's campsite. When I got back there, they're still having laughs and smiles by the campfire. I break down crying and I'm trembling. I explain what happened, and my aunt woke up and said, "Oh God." He probably thought that he was someone he knew and was doing it as a joke, dismissing me. My cousin saying, "Yeah, he probably stopped running after he realised he didn't know you, idiot." I wish I was taken seriously, but other than that one thing happening, there was no reason for them to really be afraid. My experience makes me think twice about going alone camping now. I always carry pepper spray with me too, and an alarm. I hope I never see that guy again. Now, while I was growing up, my family would visit the same lake every year for every summer weekend. As we got older, we would visit a large rock we called the Cliffs and jump off it. The rock's only about 15 feet tall at the highest point. For the water, that's really deep. When we got older, we would jump in and try and touch the bottom, but we never could. When my brother and I were in our teens, we took our kayaks to the cliff's edge to jump on our own. We jump off several times. We then find a nice cold spot at the very top of the cliffs and chill there for a bit. As we're sitting there, we notice a white shape in the water, floating towards the surface. It's the letter H. Eventually, it sank back into the water and we lose sight. Before we can look away or even say anything else, another shape was floating upwards, the letter E. Eventually, it too sank below, but it was followed by two more letters, L, P. We didn't jump in after that. We stood up without saying a word and left. We never mentioned it to anyone, and I forgot it even happened. Several years ago, I was working as a camp counselor and told this story as a ghost story. I'd almost forgotten about it and texted my brother to see if I hadn't made it up completely. I asked him if he remembered the time we jumped off the cliffs and saw something in the water. He said yes. I asked him what it was and he too said it spelled out help. One of my friends always has these get rich quick schemes or shady ways of making money on the side. Now, in one of his more brilliant moves, he decides that he's going to rent a house out near the country line to host illegal poker games in. Yep. Anyway, on this property is probably 4 or 5 acres with this tiny rundown church about 1,000 yards away on the side, and there's a redneck guy who lives on the side in a trailer probably a quarter of a mile or so down the road. However, the property backs up to the woods, and since it's always cheaper than the range, and I and a third friend ask our renter friend if we can go shoot some guns on the property. He obliges us, and we head out there on a Saturday afternoon and find a nice berm at the tree line to shoot into. Now, we're just shooting paper targets with pistols, so we're not that far back and don't need that much room to do so. After a few magazines, we decide to venture deep into the woods to see just how far the property goes. Now, we get down to the bottom of the hill and see fluorescent ribbons that the server ties to the trees to mark property lines. We realise that the property is way bigger than we ever thought before. We're already 200 yards into the woods now. Now, just as we're remarking how big it is, we see a dead animal about 10 yards away from the property line. Walking up to examine it, we see that it's a goat that's had its head cut off, clearly done by a human. Then we see a severed goat head a little further away. Now, the really creepy part to this is that it's not the same goat. There's 2 separate ones, and clearly due to the decay, it's been multiple days apart. Now, if we weren't armed, it would have been way scarier, but it's still creepy because I fear humans more than anything in the woods now. Now, I say this was out in the country, but it's in South Carolina, so there's really not crazy expanses of wilderness. Being an East Coast state, that's pretty much all settled by people. the thing that gets me now is that there was a serial killer call not too long ago around the time we were there, and apparently he started on animals too.